It's Jefferson, climbs the ladder. Oh my goodness!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the UFC show here on the Run Pure Sports channel. I'm DraftKings, of course, and joined today, as usual, by Drew, Redkacheek, and JSU joining us today to discuss UFC 289. Pretty fun 11-fight card we got coming up later this afternoon. We'll throw it to you first. Drew, how you doing on this Saturday morning?
Yeah, doing good. Sorry we had to move it to today. It was had a bit of a drive, and it just took forever. But thank you guys for being flexible, and hopefully we can throw out some winners for the premium show. So, yeah, doing fine. And 7 p.m. locks. We got some 7 p.m. Eastern locks. We got some time to build some lineups, and there's some good contests this week. Yeah,
absolutely. $200K to first up top in the big $25 entry on DraftKings. That one is, what are we seeing, 17,000 out of 28,000. So a little bit of room left, a little bit of a later start on this UFC Saturday. JSU, throw it to you next. How you doing this morning? And what are your thoughts on this card overall?
Yeah, I think overall this card, it's okay. I mean, yeah. I wouldn't say it's the best card of all time, but the co-main event is going to be an awesome fight. So I'm excited. I would pay, honestly, just for the co-main event. So that's how I look at it. I think that fight is going to be really entertaining. I think most people, too, who are paying for this card are paying for that fight anyways, really and truly. Or they're like us and they're playing like DFS and gambling on every fight. So either way, it's going to be fun because there's great contests, like you guys said, on DraftKings. We got an awesome new look to the playbook. So if you guys haven't checked it out and you're a Run Pure Sports member, or you're not, you can use the code SUMMER33. And you can get 33% off and come check it out. We just added some stuff, a new look, and it's pretty cool. I will just say it's got all of us, me, Big T, K Phallic, and Bobby H and DC picking every single fight, either by decision or inside the distance for all 11 fights on this card. And then you got a nice little write-up done by our guy Bobby H for each fight. So really detailed, looks really good, and I hope you guys like it. And if there's something you want a little more improvement, or any type of critiques, it's a new format. So let us know. Hit us up in the Discord. We're always down to listen.
Absolutely, good stuff there. Yeah, I think if there was no sports betting, if there was no DFS, it might be a card where you kind of tune into that co-main event, like you said, JSU, and maybe skip out on the rest, but. Fortunately, when you're gambling on the fights, they're all entertaining. So it's going to be a fun night. And we do have a special guest joining us to discuss the main card. We're not going to reveal who that is. Some speculation circulating around. But I will say, I don't think people are going to be disappointed with who that special guest is. So that'll come up once we get to the main card. But let's get through these first 6 fights. First, we do start, of course, as we always do with the first fight of the night. We go to the women's division. Maria Oliveira, Diana Belbita are going to fight here. This one very, very closely lined, almost a coin flip per the market, but it is Belbita who is a modest favorite, sitting around minus 125 as we discuss this fight. Drew, let's go to you first. What do you see between these two women?
Yeah, so obviously Belbita being a little bit cheaper and a little bit better money line number. I got her ownership about 5% higher, so I got her around 31, 32%, and Oliveira around 26.5%. So to be honest, this fight doesn't really interest me that much. It looks like it's going to be kind of slow. Inside the distance isn't great. I don't see a ton of – the takedown numbers don't look great anyway, so – honestly, this would be a fight 30%. It's going to be 60% owned across all the contests. I'd probably just fade it. And I think a lot of people, Belbita is just going to be overowned, being a little bit cheaper, better money line number. So I think for me, though, I'm just going to avoid both fighters. The women's fight goes slow. I don't see any reason to really be interested in this first fight of the night.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I will say on a smaller card like this, where we only have 11 fights, obviously you've got to, pick 6 winners to begin with. So you generally need lower scores, right, to win it. Like we were on last week talking about a 13 fight card where, we're trying to get 100 points out of every fighter. You might not need that today, but that said, I am with you, Drew. I think this fight may be the most uninteresting, uninspiring DFS fight to kick it off. JSU, guessing you're with us, but your thoughts on this fight in general.
Yeah, well, it's easy to be uninspired when you have a low-level women's fight to kick off this card. So I get where you guys are coming from. M. Westlake in the chat, ban chick fights. We're one fight in. We already got the hashtag ban chick fights going. I know DC's on board for it. I will say with this fight, so again, it is low level. I would side, if you made me pick a winner, I do think Diana wins this fight. I think she's the little better technical striker. Oliveira is just very stiff with her punches. Like, she throws, but it's not fluid at all. And Diana at least will throw a little volume. She will throw. She might not be as accurate, but she will at least throw a ton. I don't know if she has like the power to really like put her out, but that's where, if you get 15 minutes of standing, you're just going to get kind of a type of fight where I could see where you're just going to fade it and hope it goes to the decision, which I do think that's the most likely outcome. I will say, though, Oliveira can be taken down. Diana has shown she will sometimes do it, but she really doesn't want to, and she struggles with the grappling exchanges once they get down. She's been caught and submitted once or twice doing it. So I would say that this fight most likely stays standing, but Oliveira can be taken down, in my opinion, if Diana wanted to try and do it. I think it is something that she could try and do. I just don't know how. She's probably not going to fare well again in the exchanges. That's where she could get caught. So for me, 15 minutes of a low-level women's fight, probably standing. I'm going to be underweight. I'm fading Oliveira completely, and I'll probably be under on Diana, or I might just fade her completely too. I haven't fully decided yet. We do only have 11 fights, so
Right.
there's not a ton of dogs and cheap fighters that you're gonna have to sell yourself on some as we get through this card, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is kind of sell myself on some of these cheaper fighters that maybe at least have a path to victory. And we'll talk about that, I think, with the next fight. But, for me, I'm going to be under on this fight, fading Oliveira for sure.
Yeah, sounds like all three of us will be under the field on Oliveira and Belbita. Let's go to the next fight. David Dvorak, big favorite here, sitting around minus 280 or so over Steven Erceg, who is making his official UFC debut. Dvorak's been pretty good in the UFC. He is coming off 2 straight losses. Before that, he did have 3 wins in a row, been in the UFC for a while. And then Erceg, we don't have obviously much history on, which I think always makes for a fun DFS spot. Maybe you can get an edge on the field if you think you know something about Erceg or Dvorak that others don't. Let's go back to you, Drew. What do you see between these two?
Yeah, so Dvorak's really interesting just with the price. Obviously, we'll get to Nunes here in just a bit, but with a lot of ownership going to her and this card being smaller, it's kind of tough to jam 2 9K fighters into this into decent lineups, at least that look decent. Like in 150, you can obviously make it work.
Yeah.
So Dvorak's going to be pretty low owned, relatively speaking, to the other fighters in the 9K range that have really good inside the distance numbers, et cetera. So I got him around 23%. I'll just be short on Steve. No interest in Steve. I don't really want to dip down into the 6K range this week, but Dvorak's a really interesting GPP play. I mean, honestly, Nunes could break the slate. I mean, when she wins, she's so dominant, and I mean, she's going to score 140 points possibly. Dvorak, I mean, has really good numbers to put up 120 points, and if Nunes somehow loses, which she has before, it would be a really interesting leverage spot. I mean, he's going to be half the ownership of Nunes. So I do like the call on Dvorak to be like a GPP play. But again, it's really tough. I was fooling around with lineups earlier, and if you want to play Nunes, you can't really get to Dvorak unless you make some ugly cheap guys. So Dvorak looks great if there wasn't a Nunes on the card. And I think for GPPs, I would try to be overweight just a little bit. I'm probably going to be maybe around 30%. So maybe 10% over the field.
Makes sense. Yeah. JSU, like we said, 11 fight card. You gotta play 6. I think on a bigger card, this would be another fight that would be mostly, at least to me, looking like a fade. I mean, we've seen 5 fights from Dvorak in the UFC. His high score, even with 3 wins, is 94. What does he have? 2 total takedowns across those 5 fights. He doesn't throw a ton of volume, especially for a smaller fighter, right? I think these guys are 125ers. So, there are a lot of reasons not to love this fight for DFS, especially for a $9,400 price tag. That's not, I don't think he's a lock to win.
Well, we saw on the last card, what was it, Malarkey? He was the lock of the week in DFS, and then he gets dropped, and it's like, well, that's
the fight game, right? Anything can happen. So yeah.
And we said that, right? We said that on the show, like anything can really happen. And when you look at Dvorak, you brought up one of the better points. Like he's had 5 fights in the UFC, 4 of them have went to decision, so all 3 rounds. He's low output, not a lot of volume. He likes to kind of walk down, but he'll dance around. And I think what's going to happen here is lower output. Erceg is definitely, if you give him the one advantage, it would be grappling. So in grappling exchanges, maybe he has that advantage. I will say, though, it's also a step down in competition for Dvorak, which is another thing. I mean, he fought Kopp, Nicolau. These guys are, I think, better fighters for sure than Erceg, just looking at him right now. But if you were to say what's Erceg's path to maybe somehow getting a victory, I would say it's grappling exchanges, getting it to the mat. And if he can get it to the mat, by submission is probably the only way. I think if this fight goes to the decision, I think it's Dvorak, because I think that means Dvorak kept it standing for a lot of the fight. And even though he's not the biggest volume guy, I don't think Erceg's anything on the feet at all to be worried about for Dvorak. So I think Dvorak would have the advantage if he kept it standing for 15 minutes. So for me, Dvorak by decision makes a lot of sense. But I will say, I'm not going to have any Dvorak at 9,400. I think it's way too much when you've got even – I know Nunes is going to be way higher owned, but her ceiling is just massive. Like 5 rounds of her getting takedowns, and which I think like that's the best path for her, honestly. Like you get a decision, Amanda Nunes, 5 rounds, and you get her just taking her down and dominating her. She's going to put up 130 plus points, and I don't see Dvorak doing it. I don't see him finishing this dude and getting that bonus in the first round right away. I think he's going to take his time like he normally does. He's a smarter fighter, and so for me, I just don't see the massive upside with him. So I'm actually going to have more Erceg because I at least see a small path to where he gets the fight to the ground, and maybe he has a little more success in those grappling exchanges once they get down there on the mat, and maybe can finish by submission. So that's where I'm going to lean 6,800. I'll take my shot on the dog in DFS.
That makes sense to me. I kind of lean that way as well, JSU, where, on these smaller cards, sometimes a big dog, a cheap dog, just getting the upset is enough, right? They don't have to put up a big score because they, just the win is enough points. If the other expensive fighters, if Nunes comes through at that expensive price point. So it does make sense to me. Go ahead.
If
Jason.
I told you that Erceg won on this card, I guarantee you're taking it regardless of the points. You're taking it on this card because dogs, man, this is not a card where there's a lot of dogs that people are very confident on. So again, I don't like Dvorak. I think there is a small path to victory for Erceg, and that's enough for me to take a chance on him.
Yeah, makes sense. Next fight on the card, Blake Bilder, Kyle Nelson. It is Bilder who is sitting around minus 250 or so, coming off back-to-back wins. His only 2 UFC fights, he has won them both as Bilder. Kyle Nelson hasn't won in 3 fights. He did have a draw in his last appearance. Kind of more of a UFC veteran for sure than Bilder is. Back to you, Drew. What do you see Kyle Nelson and Blake Bilder here?
Yeah, so this would be a spot where I would probably take a cheap guy. So between the two, we got Builder around 35%. So like to my previous point on the last fight, I mean, there's going to be some heavy ownership around kind of like the high 8s and the low 9s. So I got 35% for Builder, and I got 18% for Nelson. So pretty low owned considering it's a small card. I do like Builder. I still think he's got some leverage at his ownership and at his price. Obviously, inside the distance number, he's about 45% to finish inside the distance. In round one, he's going to be 22% to finish in round one. So pretty solid. But Kyle Nelson has similar numbers. I mean, he's 13% chance to finish inside of round one. His inside the distance number for the fight is 24%. So like considering he's going to be 18% owned, I'm going to have some Nelson in a few lineups, and that'll kind of be my cheap guy. So I understand opening up the salary with 6K fighters, but I think Nelson has pretty good upside, and considering he's going to be sub 20% owned, I like going there as possibly my cheapest guy in some lineups. So that is pretty much it for me.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like you're Nelson over Erceg if you're trying to get a salary saver down there at the bottom range of the salary pool. What do you see here, JSU, Nelson and Builder?
Yeah, I think this is a good fight to have exposure to on DraftKings. Nelson is going to come in. I think he's going to try and, push it in the beginning, early starter, swinging hard, and maybe he gets him out of there at 7,200. What we've seen, though, from Nelson is he will slow down as the fight goes on. The cardio will slow down. So that's why I like that first round finish. It kind of makes some sense because I think he comes out swinging. The last time we saw Blake fight, he kind of like he was definitely probably nervous. He was definitely trying to conserve energy. That first round, he was doing a lot of circling. He moves for sure, so it's tough for the opponent to get him, squared up and stuff. But he was just doing a ton of circling, not as much volume throwing or trying to get takedowns or anything like that. And then in the third round, all of a sudden, he just started throwing it. His hands just started letting go, and he looked pretty good. But we've seen him in other spots. I've seen him get dropped before. He can get dropped. He's been dropped. But he's a tough dude. I think as the fight goes on, it definitely benefits Blake, and that's where you could see him maybe try to get the ground game going a little bit more, get some takedowns as Kyle Nelson starts to fatigue. The cardio starts to wane down, and then he just puts that pressure on him from there. We didn't see it as much. I think it's because he was a little nervous in that first fight, but I think we see it a little more here as the fight goes on. The first round, he's just withstanding the pressure of Kyle Nelson, maybe throwing a little bit. And then the second and third round, he could really start to do damage and finish him inside the distance. So I like Blake here, but this is a fight that for DFS, I think you want to have exposure to because there's a path where both guys could finish inside the distance.
Yeah, makes sense. Our guy, Bobby H on Twitter, of course, been on a epic heater recently. He says Kyle Nelson early finish and optimal for all the giblets.
If he finishes early, he's on the optimal.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say that.
That was kind of what my point I was going to make. If Nelson does get the early finish, he will be on the optimal, which frankly you can say about almost any fighter on this card. If they get an early finish, they're probably going to end up there on an 11 fight card. But we'll move on to the next fight. Pretty much a toss up in terms of the betting odds. Aori Keeling is sitting right around minus 120 here against Davicious, the Canadian. Let's go back to you, Drew. What do you see between these two? Or Zahibi, rather. I got that wrong.
I was going to say, you got the chick and the guy fighting each other.
Yeah, we don't.
Man, I don't think it's a close fight then.
We would probably be all in on the
Aori
situation, but not the opportunity that we have. Zahibi, Aori Keeling. What do you see, Drew?
Yeah, so this is just kind of one of those fights for me where with the way you have to build MMA lineups, right around 8K is usually like my last spot that I'm filling in. So I'd play expensive fighter, go down cheap, and then I always end up in this $77 to $8,400 range. So between the two of them, they're both going to be around 20 to 25% is where I got them at. a little bit of leverage, I think, on Aori based on the inside the distance number and round one props. But I like both in my player pool. I'm pretty much even on both as far as like how I grade them out. I would say matching the field 20 to 25% is probably where I would go. And it's really just a theory on how do you construct lineups and where do they land? And I think a lot of my fighters, my last fighter will be in this range. So I want to have exposure. So neither one really stands out. I don't know if I have a take on who's going to win, but I think Aori has a little bit of a leverage from being, a better money line number, better inside the distance number, and about 20-25%. But I want to have both. I want to have both in my player pool. I think they help build good lineups with the smaller card. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, makes sense there. Two of these, like we said, very closely lined fight. And I think this will be a close fight as well. JSU, what do you see between these two?
Yeah, I think the difference in this fight, Zahibi, kind of annoying at times, doesn't throw as much volume. I think Lang, or however you say his name, he's going to get in his face a little bit and try and push a little more of a pace. And I think that's the difference in this fight. Unless Zahibi somehow gets like an early knockout or something like that, I think it's Lang in a decision or finish, obviously, because I think he's going to be the one to throw a little bit more and be the aggressor in this fight. So for me, DFS, I'm going to be fading Zahibi, and I'm going to be on Lang here at 8,300. Like Drew said, when building, DFS lineups, this is one of those ranges, especially if you're lower on that first chick fight where they're 8K, 8,200. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You kind of have to pick your spots here. So I will have some Belbita at 8K because I'm fading Oliveira. And it's the same thing. I'm going to have some Lang because I'm fading Zahibi. But you got to just take your stance on how you see the fight. But this is a spot on most of your lineup builds where I think everyone's going to fall in that range of getting one of these mid-tier fighters, or a lot of lineups will.
Yeah, love all that analysis. We'll move to the next fight on the card, back to the women's division, but I think a more interesting fight for DFS purposes, at least in this one, Miranda Maverick and Jasmine Davicious. It is Maverick, pretty big favorite, minus 250. She has won her last two fights, and in both of them has scored pretty damn well. Over, what do we have, 110, 119 fantasy points in her last two fights, which that would certainly get the job done, I think, on this card, Drew. So I think, these two, whichever side you're on, they both do like to wrestle a little bit, which is kind of what you want, I think, when you're going to, especially the women's division, right, where there are fewer knockouts in general. It's just the truth. And you can, rack up points in MMA DFS with the takedowns, the top control. I could see either of these two women getting points that way. So I think, pretty interesting fight, at least for DFS purposes here. What do you see between these two, Drew?
Yeah, so these fights are tough for me because I think there's a lot of points to be scored with takedowns and control time, and it's hard for me to kind of model that out with just other prop numbers. So obviously, Miranda Maverick, I got her around 30% ownership. Juica Davicious, I got her around 20%. So I don't really have any interest in Jasmine Juica Davicious. But Maverick, to your point, obviously at 9,300, a strong favorite. Like I said, the significant strikes from a scoring aspect is tough because, inside the distance number really doesn't matter. I mean, you could score more points by getting takedowns and control time for 3 rounds than finishing in round 1 with a knockout. So I do like Maverick. Obviously, at 30% ownership, I would try to match the field or maybe be slightly under. Really depends on how Nunes' exposure goes for me. I got her around, 30% ownership. I got her probably around 25% for my player pool. But like I said, Miranda Maverick would be my pick to win. Obviously, I think she's a really good GPP target. And it really just boils down to the scoring. Like if she can score 120 points with takedowns and control time, it's going to be a pretty important piece to the MMA puzzle today.
Yeah, makes sense. Drew, do you find yourself, it sounds like you maybe are lower on the field in general on these fights that could be wrestling match. Like obviously
it's mainly because I have a tough time scoring it or projecting it out to understand. Like like I weigh out as the pricing goes
you obviously
down.
have a very mathematical approach to your lineups.
Yeah. So like for example, there's more value in inside the distance numbers for a 9K fighter than a 7K fighter, a low 7K fighter. I'm more concerned with just the money line number for a low 7K fighter. And then I kind of match that up with ownership. But what gets me is when there's takedowns and control time, the amount of points that get racked up, it doesn't reflect inside the distance numbers, obviously. So that's where I get kind of tricked up. And it's more of me just kind of listening to you guys and kind of bumping up her number, because I got her by far the lowest in this range, because for 9,300, I would want a strong inside the distance number, but the wrestling can overpower that. So yes, to your point, I struggle creating a mathematical approach to the wrestling fights versus all the other fighters.
Yeah, this is one of those fights, JSU, where I'm not even sure if you're playing Maverick that you want the early finish. You take it on this card, of course, but
right, yeah, you're right.
What you're really after is the takedowns, the control time, and that's really where you get the monster DFS numbers. As we said many times on this card, not sure you need it, right? You're not going to need 140, 110. It's going to get the job done. But yeah, your thoughts here.
Yeah, for the optimal scoring here, for sure, you want Miranda to have 3 rounds in this fight where she's getting takedowns. Even if, like the last fight where she couldn't really keep Young on the ground and control her for long periods of time, but just getting her down and, getting multiple takedowns, get 4 or 5 takedowns. That's good. That's what you want, right? And then, of course, you do want some control time. The thing with me, like, I think you can make the case Jasmine might be just as good of a wrestler or better, and I think her hands are better, honestly. Maverick on the feet is just not that good, in my opinion, and the clinch is where both of these girls do some good work as well. This is really a fight where both chicks are very similar in a lot of ways. So honestly, it's just going to kind of come down to who wins those kind of sprawls on the mat and in those exchanges, grappling, and who kind of does it. Because I think both girls can have success getting the other one to the ground. So I'm going with the dog here, though. Jasmine, I just feel like the line's too wide. Plus 260. I just feel like for two fighters that are, in my opinion, closer than what that line would say, and the styles are very similar, I don't know why it's that big. So for me, I'm taking the dog here, Jasmine by decision, and I'm going to bet it as well. But for DFS, I will have, I will have exposure in 150. I think you should have exposure to both of these girls because they both have the takedown upside and to score a decent amount. But I will be over on Jasmine for sure, since I'm obviously picking her to win. But yeah.
I think that makes sense. I talk about it a lot on a card where it's tough to be confident in the dogs. I don't mind going to the women's division to try to find one. I would be curious to see the numbers, over the last 5-10 years, whatever it is. But I bet more women in this plus 200-ish range win than men, just as a percentage-wise play. So, yeah, I think that does make sense to me. Let's get to the final fight here on the undercard. And then, we should be joined by a special guest after that. So stay tuned. But Chris Curtis and Nasruddin Imavov. It is Imavov, who is a moderate favorite here, sitting around minus 170. Drew, back to you. What do you see between these two fighters?
Yep, another fight kind of in that mid-range, 7,700 to 8,500. So they're both right at the same ownership for me, 25% for both. Obviously, with that being the case, Imavov being a bit better money line number, I have him grading out as a little bit better GPP play. It's really interesting though, like inside the distance numbers are almost similar between the two fighters, but there's a 60-40 between Imavov and Curtis. So for me, I grade out Imavov a bit better. I will have some Chris Curtis for sure, but I will have probably match the field with Imavov and be underweight on Curtis. It just, again, it kind of fits the lineup construction. And I think this is a decent fight with it, close to a 65% chance to finish inside the distance. This would be a fight that I would feel kind of naked if I didn't have some exposure to either side. So, Imavov for me, I like the spot, and a little bit of Curtis.
Special guest, Big T. You come on, Jason. You got to have a better guess than that. JC, would we be hyping this up? Would we be mentioning it several times? If the
I mean, Big T would just be on with us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he would just, I love
Special
Big
guest.
T. He's great. Big T's the man.
Yeah.
We all know this, but come on, special guest Big T. Let's, you have a better answer. Let's be honest here.
Yeah. I mean, to be frank, let's see some guesses in the chats. I do think it is someone who could be guessed. I'll say
Yes.
that. It's not completely out of left field, but it will not be Big T. JSU, let's go to you for this fight, Imavov.
Who knows, though? Maybe Big T will jump on with special guests. Who knows? Maybe we'll just make it like a 5-man crew.
The 5-man booth overlay, but we could make it happen.
If I was commenting, it'd be Siege. I think Siege is on an MMA fight with DC. So
no, that's who DC would fight in the ring, not
so
who would join us on a show.
I know. That's what we had to have as the undercard.
Yeah.
Show.
No question about it. Let's wrap up this undercard, JSU.
Yeah.
Imavov and Curtis, what do you see?
Yeah, so Imavov, Curtis here. So Curtis at 7,700. Chris Curtis, he's got great takedown defense. We know this. And he's looking for that shot. He has power, kind of like he hit Gastelum hard a few times, and just Gastelum's just got a rock chin. But Chris Curtis got power. He can put your lights out. He did it to Joaquin Buckley, where Buckley was just piecing him up. Honestly, he was absolutely destroying him. But Chris Curtis was just looking for his opening, caught a kick, and just popped him with the left hand, and then just dropped Joaquin Buckley, and then just hammer, and that was it. Chris Curtis has that in him. He can do it. And, Imavov, to me, at 8,500, I see a little more upside in DFS with Chris Curtis. This could be, though, a fight where we get to the cards, and if it goes to the decision, I think Imavov wins. Just like the Buckley, because he's looking for that opening. He's looking for that big shot. So if that happens and it does go to decision, I would say that Imavov is probably the winner. But I'm going to take Chris Curtis here. I'm going to take Chris Curtis, training partners with Strickland. I just fought Imavov. I think they're going to have a good game plan, come in, and Curtis is going to get the victory here. I think inside the distance too, man. Chris Curtis is just a solid fighter to me.
Love it. That's JSU's call. Curtis over Imavov. Sounds like you got some of these dogs that you do like a little bit, JSU. So yeah, should be.
You got to take some shots here, DC.
Yeah,
you got to take some shots. So.
Absolutely.
But let's bring our special guest in here to start this main card off, and I'll just pop him right in.
There you go.
What's
it
up,
is.
guys?
The man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Mad Lab himself.
Former
rival of DC back pandemic days, but no longer. Definitely a better fight analyst than me. I'll give the props, even if I didn't want to give them back in 2020. Mad Lab, how you doing? Thanks for joining us. And what do you think of this card overall?
Thanks for having me on, guys. What's going on? I heard your breakdowns. I like them all. I like your breakdown on the Maverick one, actually. Because I like her. Awesome. I do like her, but I think that she definitely has a lot to learn. I don't, the card's very top heavy, guys. I mean, it's very, very top heavy. It's not a card that like a lot of casuals are really going to watch. I mean, but like you guys said in the beginning, you're paying for the co-main and kind of the main. You know what I mean? So if you're a fight fan, it's a fight you're definitely going to watch. Beneil Dariush is a guy who deserves it more than him to be in this spot. He actually deserves to be fighting for a title right now, if you ask me. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a sticky situation for him because it's a tough fight. But listen, we're going to watch it. It's a fight. We had a week off, so, let's bring it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking forward to the main card. We'll break it all down. We'll start.
By the way, how many rivals do you have? Or rivals that
I don't even know. I don't
even
know what made DraftKings come in on me, but I have no idea. It happened. I think it happened during the COVID pandemic.
I'll tell you what made me come in.
Mad Lab, late night, Friday, Saturday nights,
boredom.
Boredom.
There were no sports. We had to entertain ourselves somehow. The whole world shut down. So
then he challenged me to like a boxing match, and I accepted, and he almost deleted his Twitter account.
Well, normally I'm punching down. I'm trying to challenge people who I think I could beat. but I will say you would absolutely kick my ass if it ever came to that. So I'm glad this particular boxing match never actually happened.
I think about 100% of DFS Twitter would be saying the same thing, DC, that Mad Lab would whip them. So,
Drew, you're a math guy. What would the closing line be on me versus Mad Lab in the ring?
I don't know, minus like 1,200. Minus,
Yo, Drew, you know what he said? Drew, actually, there was a line on Twitter, and I think DC's like, I'll admit it, but I'd say like minus 320. I'm like, what?
way hard.
It is 320. I'm all in.
Yeah. Get your money in there, guys. I would have to hope that there was like an illegal strike or something, and I'd be tapping out. 5 minutes, not enough. I can't get back out there.
Before we get into the main card, I want to ask you guys a question. What do you guys think about Chris Curtis as far as like the Chris Curtis outside the cage? Honestly, do you like? Does he annoy you? Does he rub you the wrong way, or do you guys just have no?
JSU?
Honestly, he doesn't annoy me. He doesn't really rub me the wrong way. I don't know why. What rubs you the wrong way about Chris Curtis?
I had a back and forth with him actually after his fight against Kelvin Gastelum, and we were going back and forth. And I was giving him his props. I was very like, listen, you fought a great fight, but I feel like you are kind of sprinkling some salt on it by complaining the way he was complaining. I feel like every time this guy loses, he complains about something. And I'll tell you guys right now, like I'm on Imavov. I think Imavov wins a decision in this fight. I think he's got to stay away from him. He's got to use his movement. The thing with Chris Curtis is, he comes in, he's a good counter puncher. He can catch you, on the way out, which would probably happen in like the third round with Imavov because sometimes he tends to gas. But if he loses this fight, I'm going to say it right now, guaranteed he's going to complain about it. That's what bothers me about him.
I could see that. I didn't think of that, but I could see that happening where, I guess that would bother me, but
and he blocked
I never
me.
thought of it. He blocked you too?
Yeah.
Well, then, that makes more sense. That makes more sense why you're pissed off. I don't blame you for that. I hate when people block me on Twitter. I never block people on Twitter, so I hate when I get blocked. So I would be pissed off as well.
All right. Let's get to the main card. Eric Anders, Marc-Andre Barriault. Let's go right to you, Mad Lab. What do you see? Barriault sitting around minus 135 or so. Who do you got winning the fight, and what do you think from a DFS perspective here?
Yeah, I like Barriault here. My main reason for this fight is like I was never a big fan of Anders. I think he's a tremendous athlete. I appreciate everything he's done, obviously on the collegiate circuit and everything like that. But I always say there's two different kind of fighters. There's athletes that are trying to be fighters, and there's actually fighters. Barriault's really a fighter. This guy is like a pure, blooded fighter. Where Anders is an athlete kind of acting like a fighter. He's obviously a fighter because he's in the UFC, but I don't consider him like a born and blooded fighter, So if you look at Eric Anders, his volume is very low. He is very Jekyll and Hyde too. There's some fights where he looks really good, and then there's fights where he just looks like he didn't even show up. He didn't even get off the bus. Barriault, what you're getting with him. You know what I mean? This guy's going to come into fight. You're going to have to put this guy out. He has, he's going to be a little bit of the smaller guy in there if you guys saw them face to face, but that's a little bit better for his style because what he could do is he can kind of come underneath. He can kind of clinch him against the cage. He could do what he wants to do, kind of bring him into that foxhole, get money, throw some elbows, try to cut him up a little bit. And I just think this is a fight for him to win. If you look at the overall, model of the business, at the end of the day, UFC is a business, right? So they're not going to put a guy on the main card, especially on a card like this, that's Canadian, that the crowd's going to be kind of in a lull. So I think they matched this up pretty well for him. I think it's a well enough fight where it's going to be competitive, but it can also be kind of sluggish from a DFS perspective because sometimes Eric Anders does tend to skirt the cage. He'll ride the warning track. He doesn't really meet you in the middle, engage, and play that tug of war with you. So Barriault's going to have to bring the fight to him. So it's pretty much going to be Barriault bringing the fight to him is Eric Anders going to engage. And that's going to kind of tell you how the points are going to be scored here. I think just from the pressure alone from Barriault, pushing it to him, putting him up against the cage, hitting him with elbows, hitting him with the bigger shots, I think that he's probably going to win the fight. He's going to be my pick. Anders is always live, though, with his power and his athletic ability, but I just think it's more fighter versus athlete, and that's why I'm always going to go with the fighter.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Great breakdown from Mad Lab. They're awesome to get the kind of the nuts and bolts of the actual fighters. And then, Drew, we'll throw it to you. You obviously have a mathematical breakdown of what DFS players are going to do. What do you see here between these two?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting fight. Honestly, across the board, besides the money line number, inside the distance is about the same at around 25% for both fighters. Like Mad Lab said, they're going to be standing and punching. It's basically all the inside the distance numbers is from a KO probability. So they're both around 30% owned. I'll have some exposure to both, but it'll be under the field. I mean, they can definitely get a KO. I mean, it's not likely in the first round or even the second round, but I want to have exposure. It's just in that mid range where I think it possibly, with the way the card unfolds, just a winner might be what you need. So 8,400 for Barriault. I'll side with Mad Lab there. But yeah, I think they're both going to be about equally owned, and I'll just be under the field on both fighters. I'll probably have some Eric Anders, but it'll, like I said, it'll just probably be like 10%, just a sprinkle.
Makes sense. JSU, finish us off here with Barriault and Eric Anders.
Yeah, Anders, just like Mad Lab said, he's an athlete, and you just don't know what you're going to get with him because you watch him in some fights, and he's active, and then you watch him in other fights, and like you said, he just skirts the cage, and he doesn't want to engage as much. So it makes it tough from a DFS perspective because of that, because if he does engage with Barriault, this is going to be a really good DFS fight. This is going to be a fight that you're going to want exposure to because Barriault, I mean, he throws almost 6 significant strikes per minute. This dude, he's going to throw. He's going to volume up, and that is what we want. And if Anders is going to accept that and say, okay, I'm going to do the same, then, this could be really good for DFS. I think Barriault wins, but I would say I think Anders' best chance is maybe getting it to the mat and maybe implementing some wrestling. Again, the problem is, though, some fights he'll do that, and then some fights you just like it doesn't even look like he wants or knows what he's doing or has a game plan, which just drives you insane. So my pick's going to be Barriault. I hope he engages with him because then it will be a really fun fight, but I'm going to be higher on Barriault for DFS.
Makes sense to me, and I do in general like kind of, especially on these closely lined fights, betting against the quote-unquote athlete, right? The guy that looks better. I think the line can sometimes get a little bit inflated in their favor. Who's the heavyweight that played for the Cowboys, been knocked out twice?
Greg Hardy.
Yeah, like
he just got knocked out again.
He got whooped in the boxing ring too, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I love betting against that guy specifically, but I think that general Anders, I'm not going to put him quite there, but that type of fighter, I do think is profitable to bet against in the long term. Let's get to the next fight on the card. Dan Ige, pretty big favorite here over Nate Landwehr. Ige sitting around minus 250 or so. Let's go back to you, Mad Lab. What do you see between these two fighters?
I understand this and I don't understand this. I think this fight's mispriced from a DraftKings perspective, to be honest with you. Dan Ige, I have a lot of respect for him. He's a very tight fighter. And what I mean by tight fighter, I mean he's very fundamentally sound, very well-rounded. He's got very good striking. He's got very good grappling. And obviously he's got a really good chin. Overall, historically with him, though, he hasn't been a consummate finisher. You know what I mean? Like he will finish guys here and there, but he is a guy who will tend to ride the cards. Landwehr's a guy where people look at him as kind of like this new face, but he's really not. He's been fighting on the Russian circuit. He's been fighting for a while, and he's kind of a wild card, right? Like when he first came in, I really wasn't too high on him. I didn't like his attitude. I thought it was an act. But as time goes on, you realize like it's not an act with him. Like this is really who he is. So I'm actually becoming a fan of his. And, sometimes the key phrase is the better fighter doesn't always win. And someone like Landwehr, who has this very odd style, he's not really stapled to the ground. He's not like real fundamental. He'll jump off the center line. He'll do some tricky things. I could see where it can give Ige some problems here. I think the line itself, plus 210 or whatever, is a little inflated. I think the DraftKings is a little overinflated for 9,100 for Ige. And I think there's a lot of value on Landwehr, to be honest with you. I think he's a wild card on this card. I could see a world where Ige finishes him early, because Landwehr has been dropped. Sure. It does get a little crazy in there. But the longer this goes, it feels like Landwehr is the type of fighter that embraces chaos. And I think the longer it goes, that's where he's going to have his more windows. So 7,100, I do like his value there. I'm going to have some shots on him. There is a wager on DraftKings that I do like too. Landwehr plus 3.5. They have those lines now where you can actually take the line. So if it ends up going to the cards, then, he just can't get knocked out. And, he obviously can't get 30-27. But I like him here. I'll take, on a card where you have to have a couple dogs, you know what I mean? I think Landwehr's as live as they come. So I think Landwehr has value, and I'm going to pick him to win this one.
Love it. Sounds like you think this fight should be more closely lined than it is, right? That's what you're saying. The minus 250 is just too inflated for Dan Ige. That makes sense to me. I was kind of surprised to see this number as big as it is. Drew, let's throw it back to you. What do you see between Ige and Landwehr?
Yeah, if that's the case, there's going to be some pretty good leverage spots against Ige and play Landwehr. So, Vegas is loving Ige, and obviously a lot of my numbers come from that. So he's going to be 50% inside the distance. He's 22%, KO in round one. It's pretty strong numbers. He's going to be around 30% owned versus Landwehr, who's surprisingly is going to be somewhat high owned for a cheap guy. He's going to be around 21%. So for me, I graded out Ige better from, being 30% owned, the strong inside the distance numbers, but listening to UDC and Mad Lab, I guess I'm going to bump Ige's numbers down a bit and kind of argue with Vegas and then bump up Landwehr and see where the numbers fall. So as of now, I have Ige as a staple in my player pool, but it sounds like Mad Lab disagrees with Vegas. So I might take that into consideration and bump up Landwehr here.
Right. And if Ige, if you put the true line, Drew, at what if Ige was like minus 170 instead of minus 250, that would change your approach, obviously, which is kind of
he would drop down a lot. Yeah,
makes sense. JSU, what do you see here, these two fighters?
Yeah, I agree with Mazlab on the line. I totally agree with that. My thing with Dan Ige, though, I feel like he's just a little better everywhere. The competition he's faced recently will show you too. Like some of those dudes. I mean, Evilov, you can't. He lost to him. Emmett. Those are fighters, man. Those are serious dudes. And I think Landwehr is a wild card, like Madlab said, where he's going to try and get Dan Ige to kind of get him off of his game, just throw crazy shit at the wall and hope he engages. I think Dan Ige's a very disciplined fighter. He fights within himself. He's not going to reach, and he's going to wait for his shots, kind of like he did with Jackson, where I thought he was kind of just, he knew it was going to happen eventually, and he was just kind of waiting and praying, and then he finally caught him. But he didn't just rush in, and he's just very calm. And I think that's one of the reasons I feel like Landwehr, he's going to kind of get caught in that situation. And we've seen him get dropped, but he's a tough dude too. So for DFS, I like having a ton of exposure. If you're doing 150, I would definitely be way overweight on this fight. And it makes sense to have more Landwehr actually, because he still has the big upside at 7,100 to be on that optimal, where Dan Ige, I think, could get a knockout, but he could get outscored by other people in the 9K range and not be on the optimal. So that's where DFS and betting, and I agree with Madlab about the line and how you view this fight, even if I think Dan Ige catches Landwehr, trying to get wild at times and just knocks him down, I still think for DFS, you want to have heavy exposure. So my pick is Dan Ige. I think he gets a knockout probably in the second or third round when Landwehr starts to say, you know what, I got to push it a little bit, and that's where he catches him. But for DFS, I get being heavier on Landwehr.
All right. Yeah, love it. I think Landwehr does have the opportunity to pull off the upset and might be, if he does, frankly, at 7,100, probably going to be on the optimal, I would think, just given the fighting style of these two guys. Let's get to the next fight on the card. Mike Malott and Adam Fugitt. Malott, decent favorite, sitting around minus 220. Madlab, back to you. What do you see between these two?
Yeah, so, on this fight, Malott, this is a kid who they're obviously super high on. When you go back to that whole Canada thing, you got, back with Free Zahibi and GSP, they're still kind of starving for that one kid. And it seems like they grab onto people. They grabbed onto OAM, didn't work out. They grabbed onto this one, it didn't work out. Now they're grabbing onto Malott, and he's embracing it. I mean, if you watch the press conference, the kid's embracing it. He's never really fought anybody great. If you look at his record, they're all first round, second round. So there's a lot of question marks around this kid. How is he going to do when you drag him into deep water? What is he going to do when he gets cut and he faces adversity? How is his gas tank after a round and a half, 2 rounds, 3 rounds? There's a lot to be questioned about this kid. However, you also got to look at the fine lines of the business. and they're not doing UFC 289, and they're not taking this kid who's a fairly unknown, let's be honest. Unless you really watch UFC, you don't know who Mike Malott is, and you're throwing him right under the co-main event. They're doing this to showcase him. They're not doing this to put him on the card so he loses and the crowd goes, right before.
I talk about this all the time, where you can tell. I think there's listen, the UFC has smart people doing matchmaking, right? And you can tell who do they want to win the fight, and that's kind of the angle you're taking here. It sounds like.
Yeah, and they got to go in, they got to fight the fight. But at the end of the day, can you imagine Dariush and Oliveira walking out to the cage right after your hometown kid just got spark cold? You know what I mean? They're not taking that chance. They're looking at this to get the crowd going, like get them psyched up for the 2 next fights. I think there is a danger zone here for Malott. Like I said, the question marks for me here are for him are, what happens after the second round. Fugitt can take him late, can take him deep. This kid is tough. He's not no pushover, but I think it's all aligned for him. And from DraftKings perspective, 8,800, he's sub 9,000. A lot of people, when they do look at that DraftKings lineup, they either go right to the bottom or they kind of hover. They think that 9K range is the range. I like going like kind of right under that 9K range. It's almost like no man's land, so I do like him here. I think he has the upside for a finish. I think he gets the crowd going. I don't mind him in DraftKings. I think he has a good opportunity to score well, but I will be lying if I said I'm not nervous if this thing hits the third rounds, because like I said, we haven't seen him really in deep waters yet.
Yeah, it all makes sense. Drew, we'll go to you next. This fight, just per the betting odds, big favorite to finish inside the distance. Obviously, Malott, a pretty big favorite. He's cheap, and knowing, getting to know you and kind of your style for DFS, I'm guessing you're going to have quite a bit of Mike Malott in your lineups.
Yeah, he's the number one play on the slate besides Nunes. And it's interesting, though, like hearing Matt Lab talk about him being an unknown, I think Vegas kind of reflects that in some of these numbers. Like his KO number and his submission number is about the same for round one. They're both at around 20% likelihood. So, like, he's either just so versatile or they're, like, not sure if he's going to finish on his feet or on the ground. So, he's going to be owned. I got him anywhere from I aggregate ownership, and I got him at 40%, but I see him as low as 30 and as high as like 60%, depending on the contest. But
I have him
love Malott.
I have him projected as the second highest on the card.
Yeah. Yep. And I would agree with that, and I would try to be above the field on that. I like at 8,800 to Mad Lab's point. It's right in the juicy spot. You got to have these high 8K guys that can finish, and there's really no one else on the card that has numbers like this from Vegas. And like you said, there's a bit of an unknown, but as far as we're concerned, he's got the most upside for anyone not fighting 5 rounds. So I like Malott quite a bit here.
Yeah, makes sense. If you just go by the numbers, Malott does look like probably the best or second best value on the card. JSU, what do you see between these two?
Yeah, I agree with the matchmakers in that point for sure, because this is definitely something they thought about here when they put him in that third spot right before the Oliveira Dariush fight. That's thought. They want this kid. This kid's hyped up. You saw him in the press conference screaming, getting the crowd going. And I think it makes sense too. It sounds like he's like, just if you look at maybe like the upper 8Ks to 9K range outside of Nunes, I make the case he has the highest upside maybe of the rest of the 9Ks. And that's what it sounds like both of these guys think too. And for that, I like, I'm going to be heavy on Malott at 8,800 because I do think he might have the second highest ceiling in that 9K and up or 8,800 and up range outside of Nunes, because she has 5 rounds and the takedown upside is just absolutely massive. But Fugitt's not bad. I mean, like, he's not a bad fighter. This dude can, go deep. And like Mad Lab said, if this does get into the third round, that's where he's got his best chance when you get to that unknown of Mike Malott in the gas tank. So it's not a fight I would just completely fade. If you were doing 150 in DFS, either side, I would definitely have exposure to both sides. But I'm going to be heavy on Malott. I think that this kid, they want him to go. And I think he has a chance, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully we get a good fight, though.
Yeah, good test for Malott here. I do think the winner of this fight is on the optimal, is what I think.
So you guys think Mallott's the second highest owned on the card? Because I think Charles could end up being the second just because of the price and the fact that he's got dog money on him, 7,600 people don't love dogs on this card. You
Yeah,
guys
I have
are
Malott
pretty high.
Yeah, I have
Malott.
Malott right underneath Nunes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Drew,
That's
what
my
do you think?
projection. My projection.
Drew's got the
Yeah.
numbers. You think Malott second highest behind Nunez?
Yeah, if I average it out, I
That's
got
what I
Nunes
have.
50 and Malott 42%, we'll call it. So, yeah.
Okay.
That's
So
what
both
I
of you
think.
guys
But
have them kind of close to
Oliveira, I have Oliveira around 30%. I mean, it's
me
a
too.
pretty
I was just going to say that. I don't have him that high. I have him.
Yeah,
You know,
oh,
he's
okay.
going, but
Well, yeah. Let's get to that fight. Dariush, Oliveira. I think just a really fascinating fight from a actual fight perspective. Of course, the DFS will break that down as well. Oliveira, I see him as kind of obviously the bigger name between the two. The flashier fighter, I would say, is safe. And Dariush he's been awesome, but, like you said, Mad Lab, maybe deserving of a title shot, but just doesn't seem to have quite the hype around him as someone who has won. How many fights in a row has he won? It's been like eight fights, something like that. Just been dusting everybody. But hasn't always scored super well for DFS. I mean, you look at the last 3 fights, been under 100 DK points in each of them. I personally think Dariush kind of wins perhaps a somewhat boring decision here. Not boring, but just, I mean, maybe not super flashy. I think he can kind of impose his will a little bit on this fight is what I think is going to happen. We saw, obviously, Oliveira can be controlled at times in that way. Obviously, a very, very good fighter, very skilled is Oliveira. But, yeah, I personally think the line is mostly correct here. Dariush, slight favorite. Interested to hear your thoughts, Matt Lab.
yeah. So with this back in the day, I don't know if you remember when Oliveira lost to Paul Felder, right? People started questioning him about having that quit fiber, and I was one of those guys. I like you can make this guy quit. And he's obviously proved me wrong. I mean, when you go on a 3-fight winning streak, you beat Poirier, you beat Chandler, you beat Gaethje. I mean, that's the best Oliveira we're gonna ever see. That's the guy. That's him at his pinnacle, right? But if you look at all of his fights, even during the big reign that he has, and like I said, his striking has completely caught up with his grappling, which is ridiculous, his grappling. But if you watch a lot of his fights, he is chinny. The guy can be put down. Just because you're not knocked out cold and the fight's not stopped, if you get dropped, that's a circuit from your brain telling your legs to give up. And he has the reason why he's not finished. If you look at a lot of his fights, when he gets dropped in the first round, he survives. There's for 2 reasons. One reason is the round ends, or 2, people are afraid to jump into his guard.
Sure.
So it's you got to make a decision here. Well, do I let him get up and let him recover, or do I jump on his guard and now I got to be tentative and hope I don't get submitted? So someone like Dariush, he don't care about that. This guy's grappling is so high level that if he does drop him, he's going to jump into his guard because he's not afraid to jump into his guard. A lot of people don't finish Oliveira for that reason. They're so afraid that when they drop him, if they don't put him out, they're afraid to go into his guard. So they let him back up. He recovers. The round ends. He goes into round 2. So if you look at the price on DraftKings in Vegas, people are looking at this and they're saying, well, look, why is Dariush the favorite and stuff like that? I do think he deserves to be the rightful favorite. I think he's very well-rounded. I think Oliveira brings his chaos into the cage, a fundamentally sound chaos, but it's kind of a chaos. And Dariush is just a very calm, demeanored, cool guy. You're not going to bait him into a war. You're not going to bait him. He's going to fight his fight. And I think if he ends up clipping Oliveira, I think he's going to end up finishing him. I don't see this fight going to the cards, and I think Dariush is actually going to finish Oliveira in the spot.
I'm with you. I think Dariush pulls this one out. What do you see here, Drew, between Dariush and Oliveira?
Yeah, I got them both coming in around the same ownership, right around 30%.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think Dariush provides upside from a leverage standpoint. Obviously, being 30% owned, inside the distance number, to be fair for both fighters, is pretty good. Vegas has given them some respect on finishing this fight in round 1 or round 2, obviously in round 3 as well. But round 1 specifically, they're both right around 20% to finish in round 1. I'll have exposure to both fighters. It just kind of fits into that range. Oliveira, I think there's obviously a lot of name value there, even for myself that doesn't follow the fighters too closely. I obviously seeing him as a dog and knowing his history, I was keen to put him in as an underdog. So, but the other numbers besides the money line look really similar. I mean, besides KO, submission, everything looks pretty close. So I like both fighters. Dariush I have quite a bit higher as far as a leverage spot, but Oliveira is perfectly fine for me to jam in at 7,600. He provides like a perfect spot, and maybe that's why JSU thought he'd be higher owned, because he does have a lot of good numbers, and at only 7,600, it might be a spot where a lot of casuals go and plug him in. But yeah, I like both fighters. I like exposure to this fight overall.
I think JSU Oliveira is just like a fun fighter to click on, right? Like 7,600 for this guy who has all these flashy finishes, can finish at any time. Like I totally get it. I won't be completely fading Oliveira.
Who have we seen more with the flashy finishes recently, right? And this is how I think of it. Like, we obviously watch the fights, every week. And, so we see some of these guys who maybe some of the casuals wouldn't see on a day. But Charles Oliveira, I think people have seen him more recently with the flashier finishes, obviously. And I think he's more of a fan. He plays into the fans a little bit more than Dariush. Yep. He just seems more of like a fan favorite than when I watch Dariush's. And I'm not saying Dariush is a bad guy or anything like that. No, I just think Charles just plays into it a little bit more. He has that little bit of the fun, loving, like awesome, nice guy.
You know what Dariush reminds me of a little bit is Bilal Muhammad, right? Who maybe not the flashiest fighter in the world, but just knows how to win fights. But those types of fighters are fighters that people like to pick against, which I think you'll kind of see here, JSU.
Correct. And I think Dariush, Mad Lab's breakdown of why when Charles gets dropped, he doesn't always get finished after that is spot on. People don't want to get into that guard. It's too dangerous. That's recipe for most people for disaster. Not for Dariush, though. And when Daniel Cormier in their meeting asked him that question of how do you feel about people, saying that you might not want to get into that guard, he was like, honestly, I feel disrespected. He believes he's just as good, if not better, down there than Charles Oliveira. And you could see it in his face when he even said it. Like, some people just say things and you're like, okay, whatever. No, he literally said it like you could tell he actually felt disrespected, that it was even a question asked. So for me, knowing that, and Beneil has the power to sit him down for sure, and the fact that he's not going to worry about going down there to the mat makes me feel a lot more confident in Dariush. But that is why I think from a DFS perspective, I think he gets up a little higher than that 30% range because of that factor, because you're going to get a lot of the casuals who know his name, don't know many of the other dogs, and just say 7,600 for this guy. He's got some of the similar numbers like Drew was talking about. The numbers aren't that much different between the two. That's going to bring people into Charles in this spot. So I'm going to actually fade Charles in this spot because I think he does get finished inside here. And I'm going Dariush, and I'm going to be very heavy on Dariush and full fading Charles in DFS to get a little more leverage on the field.
I'm with you. I think Dariush is the play here. We'll move on to the main event quick. Mad Lab, we've talked about, Dariush jumping in Oliveira's guard if he does get, a knockdown there. I think there's a chance Dariush wrestles Oliveira here, which people have been hesitant to do because, right? Like, same reason you wouldn't jump in his guard. Like, there's no point in wrestling a guy if you don't want to be down there anyway. But I kind of question Oliveira's takedown defense because it never gets tested, right? Because nobody wants to go there in the first place. If Dariush isn't, we think he's not afraid. He's not like Dariush. I don't think he's going to get submitted from top position. So I think he could potentially kind of control, wrestle Oliveira. Kind of, that's kind of where I came up with the Muhammad comparison. And I don't know if Oliveira, to me, that's the best way to control him up against the cage, get on top. And I don't know if Oliveira would have an answer for that. What do you think about the potential for Dariush using his wrestling here in this fight?
Yeah, he's vocalized that already, man. He's vocalized that I'm not afraid of his grappling. He said his grappling is, listen, he's going to say his grappling is not that good, but we know how good it is. It's great. It's elite. But the fact of the matter is when you look at Dariush, his fundamentals in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are almost flawless. He's just not that, like you guys said, he's not that guy that's going to be flashy. He praises God, he praises his wife, he goes home. We don't see him until he fights again. You know, that's it. He's off the map after that. But this guy is so well-rounded outside of he can be clipped. That's the only thing that makes me a little nervous because Charles Oliveira does throw a lot of things down the center line and he can be clipped. But to your point, I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he tries to secure a takedown and get top control on him. I wouldn't doubt it at all. You know, I do think their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is extremely comparable. I just think that Oliveira, he's more how can I say this? Dariush is more fundamental. He says he goes through the steps. He's a thinker on the ground. He's a chess player on the ground, where Oliveira is just shooting for submissions, looking for anything that sticks. But to your point, 100%, if he takes him down, I wouldn't like sit up on my couch and be like, oh my God, he took him down. I'm kind of expecting him to bring some of his game to him tonight.
Yeah.
I got a question for Mad Lab because I see Kevin in the chat, and I saw this in our Discord as well. Someone said the same thing to me. They listed who the two have fought recently, the last 5 fights each. And Kevin says, who is Dariush beat? ? And so what's your response to that? Because my kind of response was like, yes, did Charles Oliveira beat a lot of, top contending people recently? 100%. But I think a lot of those guys, he had a massive advantage on the ground and he knew it. So I think it was just some of those guys were just bad spots where I don't see that as a massive advantage in this fight. And that's one of the differences. But what do you say when people say that? Because like I'm seeing it a lot here.
Well, yeah, I know. I see that too. Like, when we just went through the thing, the Gaethje, the Poirier, the Chandler thing, you go through that to like, well, look at that. That's murderer's row. And it is murderer's row. I mean, let's be honest. That's an amazing 3 fights right there. But first of all, you got to remember, it's not Dariush's fault. He takes the fights that are given to him. All right. And he's passing the test. When you look at the guys that Oliveira's fought, you got a guy in Justin Gaethje who he has good pedigree wrestling. We know that. Okay, he never uses it, but wrestling's a lot different than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If you take a pure wrestler and put them on their back, they're a fish out of water. That's the last place they want to be. Okay, so he submits Gaethje. Poirier is he's a good practitioner on the ground, but he is majority. This guy's a striker, and all black belts aren't created equal. You cannot compare it. You can't compare Dariush's grappling to Poirier's grappling. Chandler, a wrestler. Another guy who is a wrestler, and this is a guy who can be baited into any firefight you bring to him. He comes in with a game plan and he forgets it on the way out. So, yeah, these are all Tony Ferguson. We could say that he was a little bit older. You know what I mean? So if you look at his resume, the names on it are great, but then look what happens when he fights Islam Makhachev, and Islam Makhachev make them look like a blue belt in there. You know what I mean? So it's really – you look at the level of competition that Dariush fought. Did he really fight anyone like terrible? I mean, he fought Carlos Diego Ferreira, who's a sick black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, one of the highest degreed in the UFC. He fought Gamrot, who's extremely well-rounded. All right, Ferguson was a little, over his age, but he's fought some good guys too. But you can only fight who they give you. You can only fight who they give you, and he's passing the test. He's on a very stable win streak. And like I said, we've seen peak Oliveira. He ain't getting any better than that 3-fight run. You ain't seeing any better than that. So he's either going to stay there, which I don't think he is, because you also got to remember he did lose it's easy to win. Not that it's easy to win, but it's when you come in now on a loss and you just got submitted by a guy in your wheelhouse, how are you coming in mentally after that? How are you coming in mentally after that? So I understand what he's saying, but I don't go by resumes like that. I don't look at the resume, say he fought him. I go by styles make fights, dude. It's the matchup. Yeah,
it's a fair question, but I do agree.
Yeah, no, it's a whole fair question.
The pick here is Dariush from the 4 of us. Let's get to the main event. Another interesting fight here. Amanda Nunes sitting around minus 350 against Irene Aldana. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm kind of surprised this line isn't even wider than it is. I think that loss to Juliana Pena for Nunes is going to ultimately prove to be a blip on the radar in Amanda Nunes' career. Was she coming off a pregnancy there, I believe. I think she was just skating through that fight. And it kind of reminds me, throwback here, but the George St. Pierre loss to Matt Serra, right? Where when you look back at it now, one of the true goats of the fighting game, and it was just that one kind of blip on the radar type fight. I think that's what we're going to see with Nunes. I don't think, personally, Irene Aldana is at her level, but interested to hear what you have to say. Obviously, Nunes the pick from me. Mad Lab, go ahead. Nunes and Aldana.
You guys are you probably hate me for all the shit I'm gonna say right now, but listen, we all know Nunes is the GOAT. Like there's Nunes, and then there's everybody else. You were right. She was having a baby back then. She's also having another baby right now. They got another baby on the way. This is a girl
currently pregnant.
Well, she's not. Her partner is.
Oh, okay, I got you. I was like,
her partner is. So,
man, she's a badass. All right.
Yeah.
This is a fighter. She tampered with retirement. I got to be honest with you. I really believe if it wasn't Juliana Pena taking that belt from her, she probably would have retired. But she hates her so much that she came back. I don't know how anybody picked Juliana Pena in the rematch. There's so many different paths that Nunes had to beat her. This fight is going to be better than people think, and I'm going to explain to you why. Okay. Amanda Nunes is the type of woman that needs to get things back in the cage. If you watch her fight, she does need to get things back. If you watch her against Cyborg, her clear path to victory to beating Cyborg was take the big bad bully down and submit her, and she fought fire with her. She ended up taking her punches and knocking her out. Like she sometimes goes in there and she wants to beat you at your blueprint. Irene Aldana, man, like I come from a boxing pedigree, dude. So I appreciate what she does. I think she's one of the best pure strikers in female MMA right now. If you really watch her footwork, she never crosses her feet. She kind of skips towards you. When she's not in your range, that's the only time you'll see her kind of rock back and forth and walk. And then as soon as she gets back into any kind of kicking range, she kind of locks down. Everything is always down the middle when she's throwing them. Her takedown defense is 81%. So it's not that bad. If Nunes comes into this fight and says, I'm taking you down, that's it. Like my game plan here is I'm 35 years old. I don't want to take the damage anymore. I know what a good striker you are. I'm going to take you down. The chances are, if you saw the Macy Chiasson fight, there's something to be said. I don't know if you guys agree, but Irene Aldana could have really lost that fight. If she didn't hit her with an up kick and a liver, that could have been a split decision going either way.
I think she was losing at
that
point
that's what I mean.
Before she hit the liver from which we've never seen that. I've never seen that where someone hits her like that from the ground, like almost on her back, and just hit her, and that was it. Like they didn't even know what to do. You remember? They were like, "What's going on?" Like
she didn't even know.
Yeah,
she didn't even know. Remember, the ref came up to her. Herzog came up to her and told her what happened because she was like, "What happened?" So,
I think the crowd was like, what happened too? Like no one really knew at that point, like what actually caused her to go down. Like,
yeah, I never seen that before. I mean, I've seen I've never seen that before. Even me, when I was like, what the hell just happened? It looked like she shit her pants. But, with this fight though, with Nunes is if she takes her down and just devotes herself to the takedown, eventually the takedown will come. Eventually she has these inside trips. She'll get the takedown. If she gets on top of her early enough in a round, chances are, it's end game. But if she decides that if Aldana stuffs some of her takedown and Aldana can stand and trade with her, I honestly think Aldana is the better pure striker. If you look at Nunes, the way she strikes, she kind of slides in. She kind of throws things over the top. And Aldana's really down the center. She's down the center. She's down the center. So I think this is, from a DraftKings perspective, there's always value at Nunes no matter what her price in a 5-round fight. She lives in 5 rounds. Like she's always going to cover her value in a 5-round fight, at 95, but there's value there. But I would not fade Aldana in this spot. This is a girl who you got to remember, she's training with Alexa Grasso right now. There's a lot of momentum going on in Mexico in that gym. She's got that Mexican, she's got that Mexican spirit. She's got her best friend / training partner that just beat Valentina Shevchenko. Nobody thought that would happen. So there's kind of an upheaval in that gym right now. She really, this is a point in time where she's like, all right, well, she did it. I can do it too. I honestly think she's dangerous in this fight. I honestly think this is dangerous. And I don't think this is going to be a walk in the park. And I think that Aldana's actually live. I do. I think Aldana is live in this spot. So I'm definitely not fading Aldana at 6,700. I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, makes sense, Drew. Let's go to you. obviously Nunes, the most expensive fighter on this card, big favorite. And if you look at her run, in pretty much every win, right? She's getting 110 plus fantasy points. This is a 5-round fight. And like, I personally think the winner of this fight, like, if you're with Mad Lab, you think Aldana has a chance. I think Nunes, if she wins, is going to get the job done fantasy wise, especially on a smaller card. And Aldana at 6,700, if she wins, I would be very surprised if she didn't make the optimal, given the salary savings and how she would likely win. So I do personally think you want a piece of this fight either way in pretty much every lineup. But what do you see here, Drew, with the numbers?
Yeah, so I got a question for you guys too after we talk about this. But yeah, Nunes, I got around 50%. I'm going to bump her up a bit. They always underproject these 5-round favorites, but yeah, I'll have her around 50%. And Aldana around 20%. And after Mad Lab was talking, I was interested to see Vegas actually does respect it. This won't sound like a big number, but for a KO inside of round 2, so round 1 or round 2, Vegas has Aldana with a 15% chance, which is not like nothing. So it's interesting to hear, his analysis of the fight, because Vegas actually, just looking a little bit deeper, actually does see, there's still a live chance for Aldana to get a knockout in some form or fashion. But yeah, Nunes, it's hard to see her ever failing. Even like, honestly, I was going to say through a decision is probably like the most optimal way for her to go about it, with like 15 minutes of control time. But even in knockouts in round 1, she'll get like 120 points or 130 points. So like, it's really tough for me to see Nunes, especially if she wins. Obviously, she's not going to not get to her price tag or her value. But I was going to say, I don't know if this would be a JSU question or a Mad Lab question, but like at 9,500 for Nunes and Aldana, if this goes to decision, what are the chances? Like, obviously in cash, you play Aldana with Nunes in this spot. Like, it looks like it could finish, but if it goes 5 rounds, I could see Aldana at 6,700 being a safe, salary saver, I guess, considering what Vegas thinks it could be on the feet.
Here's the thing on my end. And JSU might have a different take, but if it goes to the cards, this thing's not hitting the mat. It hits the mat maybe once. You know what I mean? And that means it's going to be a very technical fight where they're both going to have their spots. But if this thing goes to the cards, there's no way Nunes takes her down 3 or 4 times and doesn't end up
submit.
Either that or just controlling the fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if it's what you're saying, if it's gonna go to the cards, it's gonna be majority on the feet, and then I don't know, bro. Like, I don't know. Like, is somebody gonna get knocked down, or are they just gonna kind of stay there and kind of kick their way in?
Right.
So it's tough. I personally don't like stacking fights unless it's like the smaller guys that I know are just gonna throw a shitload of volume, like when Joe Benavidez used to fight and stuff like that. But I could see a world where it happens. I could see a world where it happens.
Yeah, Jesse, your thoughts here?
I mean, I could see it too, just because like the dogs too. So there's a world where both, a lot of the dogs lose in the earlier fights, and then you get to this fight, and somehow it goes to the cards, and both.
GPP wise, Jesse, you're never stacking.
I'm never stacking a fight
GPP,
because it's just, in my opinion, you just lose so much of that like ceiling upside when you say I'm stacking a fight, because you need both fighters to do a little bit, and like Mad Lab said, if this goes to the cards and it's what Drew was saying, that means that Aldana was probably not letting her take her to the ground a little bit, right? And there's a little bit of back and forth there, which means she had success. I think if it does and it's Nunes just controlling her, though, then Aldana's probably still not on the winner at that point, because it would be just Nunes destroying her for 5 rounds of control time and keeping her down there. And Mad Lab said it, though, like, if that happens, what's the chances she doesn't get a finish? If she's doing that for 3 rounds, 4 rounds, it's just going to wear on Aldana and, that get a finish. But that is like the biggest upside to Nunes is 5 rounds of her getting just massive control time, 5 takedowns. Like, she's obviously going to be on the optimal at that point, but I'm never stacking a fight. And I like what Mad Lab said about not fading Aldana, right? Just take some stabs on her at 6,700, because at the end of the day, she gets 5 rounds too. She has at least a window because she is a good boxer, like Mad Lab was talking about. she does have some type of upside to get it done, even if it's small at 6,700. I think you want to take the chance if you're playing a ton of lineups. So I'm going to have exposure to both of these guys. I do think Nunes does just kind of overpower her. If she sets her mind to getting this girl to the ground, Chason had success doing that against Aldana. So I would assume that's Nunes' game plan, at least. You would think Mad Lab. It's not. I want to stand with her.
You also got to remember, people kind of shit on Aldana's grappling, though. If you remember in the first round of the Chiasson fight, I don't know what made Chiasson laugh, but Chiasson went for a takedown, and she converted over to an armbar, and she almost snapped her arm off. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Like a lot of other people would have tapped to that. I have no idea how she didn't, but Aldana's
they were talking about how flexible these girls are too, and I'm like, yeah, my arm would have. Who was it? Was it Felt? Who was talking about? They're like, my arm would have snapped immediately. Like whoever the commentator was.
That was Mokaev. Remember his arm?
My arm would have snapped immediately. Yeah.
So listen, her grappling's not tough. She's not going to out grapple Nunes, but I'm just saying this girl is being slept on in this fight. I think that people think that Nunes is going to come over, maybe because that she got it late notice. They think they're just trying to fill in the gap. But for 7 years, when she was Invicta, I was telling people that this girl one day will fight for a belt. I never said she would win it. I said, well, Tana's got all the tools to fight for a belt, and here she is. She shouldn't be slept on. I think at 6,700, it's a little disrespectful to her.
Makes sense. I'm personally playing 5 lineups. I'm probably going to follow the line on this one and play, 3 Nunes, 2 Aldana, or 4 Nunes, 1 Aldana. But I think the point that you're making, Mad Lab, does make a lot of sense. Don't completely write off Aldana. She does have a chance here. And at her price tag on DraftKings, if she does win this fight, I do think she'll score well enough to end up on the winning lineup. That'll do it for UFC 289. Special thanks, of course, to Mad Lab for joining us for the show. A lot of fun breaking down the fights with you and Drew and JSU as well. We do have a special promo code. Won't be up too much longer, but Summer33 will get you 33% off your first monthly or weekly payment over at Run Pier Sports. Mad Lab, you've got a site that is specific to the fight game, so why don't you talk a little bit about that for the people, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, man, it's really pigeonholed to boxing and MMA. We cover everything: breakdowns, fighter projections, fighter metrics for all the fighters. We do private podcasts, private Discord, anything. If you guys are just diehard fight fans, that's the site. It's nothing else. I mean, we have guys in there doing their NASCAR stuff and stuff like that, but it's really pigeonholed to DFS wagering and stuff like that. You get all my stuff on there. We do a live stream. We're running a promo right now. You can follow me on Twitter at the Mad Lab MMA. And yeah, I mean, it's what I love to do. It's my niche.
Pitch that promo, Mad Lab. Pitch it. You might as well get it in there.
Yeah, go to the madlabmma.com. It's promo code UFC 289 promo. Gets you a half price for the first month. We didn't do our live stream yet today, so if you do end up coming over and signing up, then you guys will be in time for the live stream. Just sign up, hop into the Discord, and I post a link in there.
Awesome stuff. Thanks for joining us, Mad Lab. For Drew, JSU, Mad Lab, I'm DC. We will be back next week. Promo code Summer33 if you do want to join us over at Run Pier Sports. We're out of here.
Thanks, guys.